The Body Knows episode 25, Power, Coercion. Welcome back to The Body Knows. In the last episode, we explored sex, love, and the nervous system, how desire, safety, and intimacy are inseparable from the state of the body. We talked about how dissociation can intrude on closeness, and how reclaiming embodied intimacy means slowing down, naming sensations, and restoring presence. Today, we take a darker turn. We move into the territory of power, control, and coercion, how abusers, manipulators, and systems of domination use the body's own survival responses against it. Because while love and intimacy can be profoundly healing, they can also be weaponized. The nervous system doesn't only respond to tenderness, it also responds to charm, threat, withdrawal, and re-engagement. These are the tools of coercive control. When someone alternates between giving you what you long for and then suddenly withdrawing it, your body becomes hooked. Your amygdala lights up, your dopamine system floods, and your oxytocin, the very hormone of bonding, ties you to the very person who destabilizes you. This is why coercion is so effective. It doesn't just manipulate the mind, it manipulates the body. It bypasses reasoning, logic, and language. It hijacks your attachment system. In this episode, we will explore how power and control take root in the nervous system. We'll look at the cycles of charm, withdrawal, and re-engagement, cycles that echo in abusive relationships, cults, and even in political life. We'll connect them to the patterns of gaslighting, love bombing, and trauma bonding we've touched on in earlier episodes. And we'll ask, how do we reclaim sovereignty when the body itself has been trained to submit? Because healing is not just about saying, I won't let this happen again. Healing is about retraining the nervous system so that what once felt like love no longer feels like safety, and what once felt like danger no longer holds your body hostage. So let's begin. Power in the nervous system. Power is not an abstract concept. It is lived, felt, and regulated through the body. To understand how coercion works, we have to first understand how power shows up in the nervous system. Think about what happens when someone walks into a room with authority. Before a word is spoken, before an order is given, the body reacts. Shoulders tighten, breath shortens, posture adjusts. This is neuroception, the unconscious scanning of the environment for cues of safety and danger, a concept developed by Stephen Porges in polyvagal theory. When someone holds power over us, whether it's a parent, a teacher, a partner, or a political leader, our nervous system reads their cues before our mind does. A raised eyebrow, a sharp tone, a sudden silence. These are not just social signals, they are bodily triggers. They can activate the vagus nerve, shift us from calm connection into fight-flight, or drop us into freeze and fawn. Abusers intuitively exploit this. They know that control doesn't always require force. Often, it requires the strategic use of charm and withdrawal. Charm floods the nervous system with safety cues, warmth, smiles, praise, and physical touch. The body opens, dopamine and oxytocin surge. The person feels bonded. Then suddenly it is withdrawn. Silence, criticism, contempt, absence. The nervous system panics, desperate to restore connection. And so the person works harder, sacrifices more, erases themselves to regain the illusion of safety. This is coercive control at its most insidious, the manipulation of nervous system states. The victim believes they are making choices freely, but in reality, their body has been conditioned to associate relief with compliance. Let's ground this in a scenario. Imagine a partner who showers you with affection one day, compliments, intimacy, shared laughter, only to turn cold the next. They stop answering your calls, or they respond with irritation to your smallest request. Your body, primed by the previous day's connection, enters a state of hypervigilance. What did I do wrong? How can I fix this? You reach out again, trying harder. When they finally give you a crumb of warmth, a smile, a softened tone, a brief touch, your nervous system floods with relief. This relief is not love. It is the body's release of cortisol after prolonged stress, followed by a dopamine surge that feels euphoric. It is the cycle of addiction written into the body. It is why leaving can feel impossible. In this sense, power is not just about who holds the money, the weapons, or the titles. Power is about who can trigger your nervous system, who can make you collapse, comply, or crave. And here's the paradox. Many of us have been trained from childhood to equate control with care. A parent's harshness was reframed as discipline. A teacher's humiliation was called motivation. A partner's possessiveness was dressed up as love. The nervous system was conditioned to expect coercion as part of connection. This is why abuse is not simply an individual problem, but a cultural one. Systems of schooling, religion, government, and media all operate through the same mechanisms of power, alternating reassurance with threat, praise with punishment, inclusion with exclusion. Now, we'll explore how charm, withdrawal, and re-engagement form a repeating cycle, a cycle that hooks the nervous system not just in relationships, but across entire societies. Charm as nervous system regulation. Charm. It's one of those words that carries a lightness, a glow. To be charmed feels pleasant, flattering, even enchanting. But when we strip it down to its nervous system mechanics, charm is not just a social nicety. it's a powerful regulator. It calms the body, opens the heart, and creates an instant sense of safety, which is why charm can also be one of the most dangerous tools in the arsenal of control. To understand how charm works on the nervous system, let's start with the basics. When we encounter someone who looks into our eyes with warmth, mirrors our body language, or speaks words that affirm our worth, our ventral vagal system, the branch of the vagus nerve responsible for social engagement, lights up. Breath deepens, shoulders drop, the heart rate steadies. The body interprets these cues as safe. This is not a conscious choice. It happens below thought, in what Stephen Porges calls neuroception, the body's silent radar scanning for signals of safety or danger. Alongside this, neurochemistry rushes to reinforce the moment. Oxytocin, the bonding hormone, rises when we experience touch, eye contact, or even the rhythm of someone's voice attuned to ours. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter of reward and anticipation, spikes when we feel we are being chosen, noticed, or valued. These chemicals don't just make us feel good, they create attachment. They lay down the tracks of trust, even if no trust has yet been earned. This is why love bombing, the flooding of attention, compliments, and affection at the start of a relationship, is so effective. It's not merely psychological manipulation, it's a nervous system event. The body literally feels safe, cherished, and bonded, even when the context is too new for such intimacy to be real. Rational warning signals, the cautious voice that says, go slow or wait and see, are bypassed. The nervous system overrides the intellect. Calm as instant regulation. Imagine you've had a difficult day. You're tense, scattered, perhaps doubting yourself. Then someone new comes into your life, and within minutes, you feel lighter. They look directly at you, not over your shoulder. They echo your words back, nodding, validating, creating a mirror of your own energy. They smile warmly, tilt their head in that micro-gesture of interest. They tell you that you seem different, special, unlike anyone they've met before. You breathe deeper without even noticing. Your nervous system shifts from guarded to open. The stress hormones in your bloodstream, cortisol and norepinephrine, begin to ebb. The body experiences this encounter not as a casual chat, but as a profound relief. You feel seen. This is the alchemy of charm. It regulates the nervous system not by force, but by offering cues that mimic deep relational safety. And once that regulation is experienced, the body begins to crave it. Just like taking a first hit of a drug, the nervous system starts to anticipate, to long for more. Abusers, manipulators, cult leaders, and even politicians understand this, some consciously, many instinctively. They know that charm, delivered with precision, can open doors that logic could never unlock. It disarms defenses, creates premature intimacy, and hooks the nervous system into a cycle of reward and relief. Love bombing, as somatic overwhelm love bombing, often gets dismissed as just too much attention or fast-tracking a relationship. But in reality, it is a somatic overwhelm event. The sheer intensity of charm, constant texts, lavish praise, long gazes, and dramatic promises doesn't just flatter, it floods the nervous system. In a healthy relationship, oxytocin and dopamine rise gradually as trust is built over time. But in love bombing, those chemicals spike rapidly, creating a bonding high that feels intoxicating. The problem is that the body mistakes this chemical storm for genuine safety. The victim feels they've met their perfect match, their rescuer. What makes this especially effective is how early intense charm bypasses rational warning signals. The prefrontal cortex, the brain's rational center, is slower to process than the amygdala and limbic system. By the time the conscious mind starts asking, is this too much too soon? The body has already been hooked. The nervous system has already filed this person under safe, desired, and bonded. This is why so many survivors later say, I knew something was off, but I couldn't walk away. It wasn't weakness or naivety, it was biology. Mirroring, eye contact, and words of affirmation. The mechanics of charm are subtle but precise. Mirroring. When someone mirrors your posture, gestures, or speech rhythms, your mirror neuron system activates. This creates a sense of familiarity and likeness. The body interprets, they are like me, I can trust them. In reality, it's a learned tactic. Copy enough of a person and they will unconsciously lower their guard. Eye contact. Sustained soft eye contact is one of the most powerful oxytocin triggers. It mimics the gaze between parent and infant, lover and beloved. Too much eye contact from a stranger might feel threatening, but in the context of charm, it feels magnetic. It says without words, you are the only one here that matters. Words of affirmation. Compliments are not just words. When delivered with timing and intensity, they activate dopamine circuits tied to self-worth. Phrases like, I feel like I've known you forever, or no one's ever understood me like you do, are designed to fast-track intimacy. They trick the nervous system into believing that deep relational safety already exists. Together, these cues create a neurochemical cocktail. The recipient feels calm, seen, validated, and uplifted, a state of nervous system regulation that is incredibly difficult to resist. Charm as both gift and weapon. It's important to say that not all charm is manipulation. Humans regulate each other all the time through warmth, humour, presence, and attention. A friend's kind words can lift us out of despair. A lover's gaze can anchor us in security. Charm at its best is a form of care, but when charm is used strategically, front-loaded in intensity, detached from genuine intimacy, and followed by withdrawal, it becomes a weapon. It conditions the nervous system to equate this person with relief. And once that conditioning sets in, the victim will often tolerate escalating harm just to regain those moments of charm. This is the hook of coercion. The nervous system's hunger for regulation is exploited, turned into a leash. Personal reflection. My encounters with charm. Looking back across my own life, I see how charm has operated on me, sometimes in subtle ways, sometimes in devastating ones. I've met people whose presence felt immediately grounding. Their charm wasn't just flattery, it was energetic. My body softened around them. I felt light, even euphoric. And yet, in some of those encounters, I later realized that what felt like safety was actually the opening act of a cycle of control. When you've grown up in environments where love is inconsistent, where affection and harshness arrive in unpredictable waves, charm feels like a miracle. It feels like the thing you've been waiting for, but in truth, it's a familiar rhythm. The nervous system recognizes it because it echoes the dance of childhood. Love given, love withdrawn, love dangled just out of reach. There were times when I mistook intensity for intimacy, when I believed someone's effusive words over the quiet signals of my own body that whispered, "Slow down," when I let charm erase the red flags waving clearly in front of me. And there were times too when I noticed my own use of charm, softening my voice, leaning in, giving validation, not out of manipulation, but out of a desire to connect. Yet I can see how easy it is for that instinct to be exploited by others. Charm is not evil, it is powerful, and like all power, it depends on intention. But once you've seen how it operates in the nervous system, you can never unsee it. You begin to ask, is this charm an opening to deeper authenticity, or is it bait in a cycle of control? From charm to control, the real danger of charm is not in its presence, but in what follows, because charm rarely stands alone. In coercive dynamics, it is always followed by withdrawal. The warmth is replaced by coldness, the attention by absence, the validation by criticism, and the body, hooked on that first wave of relief, will do almost anything to get it back. This is where we move next, into the cycle of withdrawal, silence, and the desperate re-seeking of safety. But before we go there, hold this truth. Your body is not naive to being charmed. Your nervous system is designed to seek connection, to soften in response to warmth, to open when it feels seen. That is not a flaw. That is humanity. The tragedy is not that we are wired for charm, but that some people weaponize it. And so the question is not how to stop being charmed. The question is how to notice the difference between charm as genuine regulation and charm as the opening act of coercion. Withdrawal. The nervous system in freefall withdrawal is one of the most devastating tools in the coercive cycle of charm, control, and re-engagement. If charm is the warm sun on your skin, withdrawal is the sudden plunge into icy water. The shift can be so stark that the body doesn't just register it as hurt feelings or distance. It registers it as a threat to survival. The nervous system in abandonment, sudden silence, ghosting, or coldness activates the amygdala, the brain's alarm system. For most of human history, being excluded from the tribe meant death. Our nervous systems have not outgrown this truth. Abandonment, whether temporary or permanent, registers as an existential threat. In these moments, the sympathetic nervous system surges. Adrenaline floods the bloodstream, the heart rate climbs, and cortisol spikes. The body prepares for fight or flight. Yet because the threat is relational, you cannot run at it, cannot punch it, cannot resolve it physically, the survival energy has nowhere to go. Often this tips into freeze or fawn. Freeze looks like numbness, exhaustion, and inability to act. Fawn looks like chasing the other person, appeasing, apologizing for things not done wrong. Both are body-based strategies to stave off abandonment. This is why withdrawal can feel like a death sentence. The body reacts as though abandonment equals annihilation. Even if the rational mind says, they just didn't text back, or maybe they're busy, the nervous system is already spiraling. The dopamine crash. Another layer of pain comes from neurochemistry. When someone charms us, especially with intensity, our brains release dopamine and oxytocin. These neurochemicals don't just feel good, they create bonding and craving. Withdrawal yanks that chemical rug away. The dopamine spikes collapse, the oxytocin warmth turns cold. This creates what psychologists call intermittent reinforcement, the same mechanism that makes slot machines addictive. The brain craves the return of connection, scanning obsessively for signs of reconciliation. This isn't weakness or neediness. It's a neurobiological trap. Survivors of abuse often describe feeling hooked, even when they know rationally the relationship is toxic. That's not a failure of willpower. That's the addictive cycle of charm to withdrawal, which then loops back to charm. Cultural scripts of withdrawal Western culture often romanticizes withdrawal. Think of the endless films, books, and songs that depict the hard-to-get lover, the one who disappears to make the other chase. Ghosting, stonewalling, or playing cold are treated as strategies even as signs of strength. But beneath the surface, these are acts of nervous system manipulation. They deliberately activate threat responses in the other person, making them more malleable, more desperate, more likely to comply. In family systems, withdrawal often takes the form of the silent treatment, which researchers have linked to long-term psychological harm and increased cortisol levels. Withdrawal isn't neutral, it's coercive. Personal reflection. Living the cycle, I have noticed these patterns in my own life. Until recently, I was almost oblivious to the coming and going of people because I always tried to remain present, whether in friendships or relationships. I grounded myself, did my best to show up sincerely, and took pride in being consistent. But what I often experienced was this. Individuals would come into my life with energy and intensity. They'd shower attention, affection, words of affirmation, and draw comfort from my presence. Then, just as suddenly, they'd pull away. Withdrawal would come like a slammed door. And worse, when I noticed this and voiced it, I'd often be gaslit into believing that I was the one withdrawing. That accusation never landed as truth within me. I knew I was conscious of my presence. I knew I chose to connect from genuine desire, not from need or manipulation. Yes, there were times I walked away, but I took responsibility for those choices. I regrouped, grounded myself, and tried to return with clarity. Still, the cycle left deep marks. Game players and avoidance would step aside, go cold, then rush back in with renewed warmth. Each time, I noticed how it took longer to recover, how each loop drained more energy from me. Eventually, the clarity was undeniable. I couldn't accept such behavior anymore. When people accused me of never wanting to be with them, I realized painfully that their actions had made that true. My nervous system had lived through it too many times. My time is precious, my energy is finite. And most importantly, my work and survival aren't just about me. I do this for my children too. When individuals come and go unpredictably, it isn't just me they affect. It ripples outward into the lives I'm responsible for. That's why I no longer tolerate the cycle. It feels inconsiderate, even selfish. I see now that those who play with presence and absence are often chasing their own unmet needs without considering the harm it causes. And because I see it so clearly, I can't look away. The psychology of withdrawal research confirms what survivors intuitively know. The silent treatment is one of the most common relational abuses, reported by nearly 70% of couples in some surveys. Psychologists call it a form of emotional neglect and note how it erodes trust more than overt conflict. Attachment theory sheds more light. For anxiously attached individuals, withdrawal triggers primal panic. For avoidantly attached individuals, withdrawal feels safe, but only temporarily. Both are locked in a dance of pursuit and retreat, each reinforcing the other's insecurity. This is why so many abusive relationships feel like roller coasters. The highs of connection, the lows of withdrawal, the unpredictable return, all wire the nervous system into chaos. Personal reflection, responsibility, and boundaries. I have learned to take responsibility where it belongs. There were times I wasn't fully present, times when overwhelm made me withdraw. I've owned those moments. But I've also seen the stark difference between honest retreat for self-regulation and the manipulative withdrawal of others. When I stepped back, it was because I needed to regroup, to ground myself, to restore balance. That's human. That's healthy. But when others withdrew as a strategy to punish, to control, to test, it cut deeply. Because withdrawal weaponized feels like erasure. The hardest part has been realizing how long it takes to recover from these cycles. It isn't just hours of discomfort. Sometimes it takes days. During those stretches, the body feels hijacked. Sleep falters, appetite disappears. The mind loops on what did I do wrong, even when the rational truth is clear. I've come to see that pattern as one of the most inconsiderate forms of behavior I've ever endured. And I've made peace with moving on from those who treat presence as a game. Why withdrawal creates craving. The craving cycle is perhaps the cruelest part. The brain, wired for survival, interprets withdrawal not as disinterest but as danger. It then craves reconnection to resolve the threat. This is why survivors often pursue the very people who harmed them. Intermittent reinforcement is powerful because it is unpredictable. If someone were always cold, the nervous system would eventually adapt. But when warmth and cold alternate, the nervous system becomes hooked. It waits, restless, scanning for signs of the return. Laboratory studies on animals show that intermittent rewards produce the strongest conditioning. Humans are no different. This is why withdrawal is more addictive than consistency, even if consistency is healthier. Personal reflection, choosing balance today. I see these dynamics differently. I no longer interpret withdrawal as a puzzle to solve. I don't chase explanations from those who vanish or turn cold, because I know what the cycle costs. My peace, my balance, my time. When people show up inconsistently, they show me who they are. And when presence cannot be maintained, I choose to move on. This isn't coldness, it's clarity. It's protecting the nervous system from patterns that erode stability. It's choosing peace over chaos. And perhaps most importantly, it's reclaiming self-respect. For years, I let withdrawal destabilize me. Now I let it reveal what I need to see. Bridging to re-engagement withdrawal is rarely the end. More often, it's the setup for the next act, re-engagement. Just when the body begins to adapt to absence, charm returns. The abuser reappears with tenderness, apologies, or declarations of love. The nervous system, starved for connection, floods with relief. The cycle resets, the hook deepens, re-engagement and the trauma bond. If withdrawal is the icy plunge, re-engagement is the sudden return of warmth. Just when the body begins to adapt to absence, the cycle flips. A text arrives, a call comes through, a knock on the door. The face that once disappeared now beams with tenderness. For the nervous system, it feels like rescue. The return of charm, when charm comes back, it doesn't just restore equilibrium, it floods the system with relief. Oxytocin, dopamine, and endorphins rush in. The amygdala quiets down, the vagus nerve softens, and the body feels, at least for a moment, that safety has returned. But this relief is deceptive, it's not safe. It's intermittent reinforcement at work. Psychologists have long noted that the most powerful form of conditioning is unpredictability. A reward given sometimes at random hooks the brain far more deeply than one given consistently. Slot machines work on this principle. So do toxic relationships. When the abuser disappears, the survivor spirals into craving. When they return, the craving is satisfied. The cycle repeats, wiring the nervous system more tightly each time. Scenario: the disappearing lover. Imagine this. An abuser vanishes for days. No calls, no explanations, silence stretches into panic. The body aches, the mind loops, sleep disappears. And suddenly, they return with flowers, with apologies, with declarations of "I missed you." The body doesn't evaluate whether the words are true. The body feels the relief, the oxytocin surge overrides the doubt, and in that flood the bond deepens. The nervous system learns, I survive only when they return. This is the trauma bond. The biology of the trauma bond. Trauma bonding isn't a weakness, it's biology. The cycle of charm to withdrawal back to re-engagement traps the nervous system in alternating states of hyperarousal and relief. During withdrawal, cortisol spikes and the body enters survival mode. During re-engagement, dopamine and oxytocin flood back in, producing not just pleasure but profound relief. Over time, this wires the association. Pain is followed by relief, therefore I must endure pain to receive relief. It's the same mechanism that drives addiction. In fact, neuroscientists have compared trauma bonding to substance dependency, noting that both rely on the brain's reward system being hijacked. Personal reflection. Feeling the hook. I've lived through this cycle enough times to know how it feels in the body. The silence comes first, the absence, the withdrawal. Then the voice in my head begins. Maybe they're busy, maybe I did something wrong. My body tightens, sleep grows restless, old fears stir. And then, just when I start to detach, they return. Tender words, apologies, small acts of care. Relief floods in. It's not just emotional, it's physical. My chest loosens, my stomach unclenches, the world feels safer. But underneath that relief is another voice, the one I've learned to listen to. This is the hook. This is the cycle. It took me years to distinguish real love from trauma bonding. For a long time, I mistook the intensity of the return for proof of care. Now, I see it differently. If someone's presence feels like a rescue after they created the absence, it isn't love. It's control. Why it's so hard to break. The cruel genius of the trauma bond is that it fuses danger with safety. The same person who causes the pain is also the one who relieves it. The nervous system can't easily separate the two. This is why survivors often defend their abusers. Outsiders may ask, why don't you just leave? But to the survivor's body, leaving feels like stepping into annihilation. The abuser is both poison and antidote. Culture compounds this trap. Movies, songs, and stories glorify the make-up after the fight, the dramatic reunion after separation. Conflict followed by passionate return is sold as romance. Few ask what it costs the nervous system to live in those cycles. Philosophical reflection, free will, or conditioning. One of the deepest questions trauma bonding raises is, do we choose in these cycles, or are we conditioned? On one hand, it looks like a choice. A person stays, forgives, and welcomes back. On the other hand, the nervous system is responding to survival wiring and biochemical traps. Philosophers like Spinoza argued that most of what we call choice is really the mind rationalizing what the body has already decided. If that's true, then staying in a trauma bond isn't about weakness of will. It's about the nervous system trying to survive. The work of healing, then, is not just to change thoughts, but to rewire the body's sense of safety. Personal reflection, seeing the pattern in my own life, clarity came slowly. At first, I didn't even recognize the cycle. I thought people returning meant they valued me. I thought reconciliation was proof of love. It took years of repetition, of charm, withdrawal, and return before I saw the pattern. I began to notice how accusations, projections, and triangulation always accompanied these returns. I'd be told I was the one withdrawing, or that I was the untrustworthy one. Yet my body told me otherwise. My body whispered, no, this is the trap. The slow clarity came not from sudden realization, but from tuning into those body signals. Each time I felt the rush of relief, I asked, what came before this? Who created the absence I'm so relieved to escape? That question changed everything. Integration, relief, or love? The hardest but most liberating truth is this: relief is not love. Love doesn't need to wound to soothe. Love doesn't disappear to return stronger. Love is presence, consistency, safety. Re-engagement in the trauma bond masquerades as love, but it's really relief from pain that never should have been inflicted. Understanding this has been the first step in breaking the cycle. Naming the hook, feeling the pattern, reclaiming nervous system sovereignty. And this brings us to the broader cultural and psychological frames that sustain these cycles: gaslighting, love bombing, and the normalization of coercion. That's where we turn next. Psychological and cultural frames. If trauma bonding is the cycle that hooks the nervous system, then psychology and culture are the languages that make it seem normal. Without these frames, abuse might stand out more starkly. But when psychology names the behaviors without fully grasping the body's role, and when culture wraps coercion in romance, loyalty, or even morality, the cycle finds reinforcement at every level. This is why survivors often remain trapped for so long. The manipulation is not just in the relationship, it's echoed by society itself. Gaslighting, rewriting reality. Gaslighting is more than lies. It is the systematic dismantling of a person's perception. That didn't happen. You're overreacting. You misunderstood me. These phrases aren't just dismissals. They're attempts to hack the nervous system. When someone tells you what you saw or heard is false, the amygdala spikes with uncertainty. Doubt spreads like static across the body. Was it me? Did I imagine it? The very signals of survival, the gut churn, the rapid heartbeat, get recoded as irrational. Over time, the survivor learns to distrust their own body. This is the ultimate form of control, not just changing someone's mind, but convincing them that their nervous system itself is faulty. There were times when I recorded conversations for my own safety, knowing I would later be told events didn't happen the way I remembered. When I played them back, I was confronted not only with the abuser's words, but with the surreal experience of hearing how clearly I had been gaslit. At one point, even the act of calling out gaslighting was itself gaslit. You're imagining that too. It is hard to describe the level of psychic violence this creates. Psychologists have studied gaslighting as cognitive manipulation, but survivors know it as something deeper. It is the nervous system itself being overwritten, the collapse of trust not just in others, but in one's own perception of reality. Love bombing, safety as a weapon. If gaslighting is destabilization, love bombing is seduction. The early stages of coercive relationships are often marked by overwhelming affection, constant contact, lavish praise, intense attention. Biologically, love bombing is a nervous system flood. Oxytocin surges, dopamine loops ignite, the vagus nerve hums with safety. What looks like passion is often the hacking of attachment wiring. In my own experience, I've seen how intoxicating this can be. To be mirrored so intensely, to hear words of affirmation that echo exactly what the heart longs for, it feels like destiny. But in time, I noticed the difference between genuine connection and love bombing. The latter always comes too fast, too much, too overwhelming, and eventually always collapses. Culture makes love bombing even harder to detect. Films and novels glorify whirlwind romances. The sweep you off your feet trope is celebrated as proof of love. Rarely is it acknowledged that intensity without stability is a warning sign. Trauma bonding. Addiction in disguise. Trauma bonding itself has been described in psychology as a form of intermittent reinforcement. The cycle of charm, withdrawal, and return mirrors the mechanics of gambling and substance addiction. Survivors are not weak for being caught in it. They are neurologically conditioned. Culturally, however, trauma bonding often hides under other names: passionate love, complicated relationships, star-crossed lovers. What is addiction at the level of the nervous system is packaged as romance. I've lost count of the times I excused behavior because culture told me struggle was part of love. That suffering proved loyalty. That returning after conflict was the mark of true passion. It took years to see that this wasn't passion, it was programming, gender scripts, and coercion. Another frame that sustains cycles of coercion is gender conditioning. Men and women are often trained into different relationships with boundaries, power, and vulnerability. Men are taught that persistence is noble, that refusal is a challenge to overcome. Don't take no for an answer has been marketed as romance for generations. Women are socialized to comply, to avoid conflict, to soften their no into silence or acquiescence. To be polite, even in discomfort. These scripts create fertile ground for coercion. A woman saying no is framed as coyness. A man withdrawing affection is framed as strength. The nervous system reads these as a threat, but culture reinterprets them as normal behavior. Neurodivergent people, too, are caught in this web. Autistic or ADHD individuals may struggle to detect manipulation cues or to assert boundaries clearly, leaving them more vulnerable to cycles of coercion. I know this firsthand. For years, I felt the double bind of sensing manipulation deeply, while lacking the socially acceptable tools to push back in ways that would be heard. Family patterns, where it begins. These cycles don't start in adulthood. Families often model coercion as normal. The child who resists a hug is told, "Don't be rude." The teenager who asserts independence is labeled selfish. The nervous system learns early. Compliance is rewarded, autonomy is punished. By the time adulthood comes, these embodied lessons are so ingrained that love bombing feels like safety, withdrawal feels like danger, and re-engagement feels like salvation. I can trace these patterns back to my own childhood. Moments where saying no was framed as disrespect. Times when my quiet was read as defiance. It's no surprise then that later I would struggle to distinguish love from coercion. My nervous system had been primed for the cycle long before I entered it. Philosophical reflection, free will, or conditioned response. At the heart of this lies a deeper question. How much of our behavior in relationships is free choice, and how much is conditioned response? Philosophers from Augustine to Sartre have wrestled with this. Sartre insisted on radical freedom, the idea that even in oppressive circumstances we still choose. But neuroscience complicates this view. If the nervous system is wired to interpret withdrawal as mortal danger and re-engagement as salvation, then choice is less free than it seems. This doesn't mean we are doomed to repeat the cycle. It means the work of healing is about creating conditions where the nervous system can experience safety without manipulation. True freedom comes not from willpower alone, but from retraining the body's responses. Cultural normalization, why we stay silent. The final frame is silence itself. Culture teaches us to keep private pain hidden, to not air dirty laundry, to preserve appearances. Survivors of coercion are told, directly or indirectly, that speaking out is shameful. This silence protects abusers. Without words, the cycle remains invisible. Without community acknowledgement, survivors blame themselves. I felt this silence. Even when I knew what was happening, I struggled to speak it aloud. Who would believe me? Would I be dismissed as dramatic or bitter or unstable? Culture conditions us to doubt not only our nervous systems, but our right to name the abuse. Breaking that silence is itself an act of reclamation, personal reflection, awakening to the frames. The hardest part of recognizing these psychological and cultural frames was realizing how deeply I had internalized them. I excused behaviors because they looked like the stories I had grown up with. I doubted myself because the scripts told me I should. But the more I studied, the more I healed, the clearer it became. Love that relies on gaslighting, love bombing, or trauma bonding is not love at all. It is controlled and wrapped in a cultural costume. Now when I look back, I can see how projection, triangulation, and accusations reinforced the trap. Yet I can also see the slow clarity, how each time my body whispered unease before my mind caught up. That unease was not weakness, it was wisdom, integration, seeing beyond the frames gaslighting, love bombing, trauma bonding. These are not just psychological terms. They are nervous system events reinforced by cultural scripts. Recognizing them means breaking the spell. For me, this recognition has been both devastating and liberating. Devastating, because it showed how much of what I once thought was love was really coercion. Liberating, because once named, the cycle loses some of its power. The frames may still exist in psychology, in culture, in family patterns, but my nervous system no longer dances to them as it once did. And that is the beginning of freedom. And this leads us into the next stage of the episode, personal reflections, seeing the pattern. Here, we'll move fully into lived experience, grounding the theory in your own encounters, and how the clarity emerged over time. Personal reflections, seeing the pattern, how the pattern reveals itself. Even with all the psychological terms and cultural scripts laid out, gaslighting, love bombing, and trauma bonding, it's still not always obvious in the moment. The nervous system is wired to chase safety, and charm feels like safety. Withdrawal feels like death. Re-engagement feels like salvation. But the cycle can only hold as long as it remains hidden. Survivors often describe the moment of seeing the pattern as both painful and clarifying. Painful, because it reveals how long manipulation has shaped their life. Clarifying, because once you name the rhythm, charm, withdrawal, or return, you can no longer unsee it. Projection and triangulation are two of the most insidious reinforcements. When someone accuses you of the very behavior they are guilty of, the brain enters a maze. Do I defend myself, or do I doubt myself? Either way, the abuser keeps control. Similarly, triangulation, introducing a third person into the dynamic, even just in suggestion, destabilizes the nervous system by activating rivalry, insecurity, and hypervigilance. For many, these tactics blur into normality. Culture supports them by framing jealousy as love, persistence as romance, and silence as strength. The survivor is left doubting their perception until, finally, the nervous system forces recognition. The gut churns one too many times. The body refuses intimacy after one too many accusations. A line is crossed, and the pattern crystallizes. That moment of clarity is not just cognitive, it is somatic. The body says, enough, personal reflection, my own encounters with the cycle. For a long time, I was oblivious to the coming and going of people. I thought it was normal. People drift in and out of each other's lives. But as I worked on myself, I began to notice the pattern, the love bombing, the intensity, a way someone would lean on my presence for comfort and then suddenly withdraw. It would happen like this. Someone would shower me with attention, affection, and words of affirmation. They'd lean into the safety of my presence. Then, just when I had relaxed into the connection, they would pull away. Coldness, silence, gaslighting that I was the one withdrawing. That accusation always cut deeply, because I knew in myself that I chose presence consciously. When I connect, it's from genuine desire, not need. I give my attention with intention. Yes, there were times I wasn't fully present, moments I walked away, times when I needed to regroup and ground myself. But I took responsibility for those lapses. I always sought to return with clarity and effort. The game players and avoidance, though, thrived on withdrawal. They stepped aside, knowing I would pursue, then rushed back in when they sensed I was moving on. At first, I thought this meant the bond was real, that they cared enough to return. Now I see it differently. It was a cycle, and cycles wear you down. Each withdrawal left me in freefall. My nervous system would spin, searching for balance. Each re-engagement brought temporary relief, but less and less trust. Eventually, I reached a point where I couldn't unsee it. The cycle no longer looked like love. It looked like control. And when I began to hold my boundaries, when I stopped giving second, third, fourth chances, I was accused of being cold, of never wanting them in the first place. Irony was cruel, but the truth is simple. Actions have consequences. My nervous system has lived this too many times. I can't accept such behavior anymore, nor should I. The stakes are too high. My time, my energy, my balance, they're not just mine. They sustain my work, my children, and the people who rely on me. When someone repeatedly disrupts that, it isn't just inconsiderate, it's destructive. What once confused me now feels clear. Presence is a choice. Withdrawal and return, played as a game, is not love. They are manipulations. And once seen, I cannot go back to blindness. Practices to break the breaking cycles of coercion and trauma bonding isn't just about walking away from the person who manipulated us. It's about learning to reclaim the nervous system they hijacked. These practices aren't abstract self-help tips. They are lived survival skills. They begin with recognizing what the body is telling us, not what the mind insists, not what culture moralizes, but what the body actually feels. Noticing the charm highs and withdrawal crashes. Charm is intoxicating because it's biological. When someone showers us with attention, mirroring, or affection, oxytocin and dopamine surge. The body feels safe, seen, and wanted. When that charm is suddenly withdrawn, the nervous system doesn't just feel disappointment. It collapses into panic. Cortisol spikes, the amygdala sounds alarms, and the body reads abandonment as a threat to survival. The first step in breaking the cycle is noticing these highs and lows as physiological states. Instead of interpreting them as proof of love or rejection, we can begin to label them for what they are. Nervous system swings. That small shift makes the invisible visible. Suddenly, we aren't just in the storm. We can see the weather pattern. From journaling to embodied observation, many trauma survivors are told to journal every detail, to track emotions like entries in a ledger. For some, this is helpful, but for me, it wasn't about keeping notebooks full of words. It was about building awareness in the moment. I learned to take mental notes instead, to pause and acknowledge what was happening inside me. My chest feels tight. My stomach is dropping. My hands are restless. These weren't random sensations. They were signals of my nervous system. At first, I tried to logically analyze them, turning them over in my head. But logic could only take me so far. What changed everything was moving from analysis to acceptance. Instead of asking, why am I feeling this? What does it mean? I began to simply acknowledge. This is my body telling me something. This is what survival feels like. That shift from analysis to acceptance was the practice. It taught me to stop fighting with my own signals and to trust them instead. Building baseline safety. Without the abuser trauma bomber, bonds thrive because the nervous system is conditioned to believe that safety only arrives with the return of the abuser's charm. But this is an illusion. Safety exists elsewhere if we can learn to recognize it. For me, rebuilding safety meant turning away from the cycle and grounding myself in other anchors. Simple routines, steady breathing, long walks, creative work, and moments with my children became signals of continuity that my body could trust. They didn't carry the same dopamine spike as love bombing, but they provided something more precious: stability. Over time, my nervous system learned that peace could exist without chaos. That safety wasn't dependent on someone else's unpredictable behavior. This was slow, deliberate work, but every time I felt calm without them, it weakened the bond. Collective practices. Naming coercion as abuse cycles of coercion often thrive in silence. Families excuse them, communities normalize them, culture romanticizes them. That's why collective practices matter. Part of breaking the cycle is not only reclaiming our own nervous system, but also naming what's happening in plain language, for ourselves and for others. Calling love bombing what it is, aiming ghosting as a form of control, recognizing gaslighting as abuse rather than misunderstanding. Every time we name the pattern, we weaken its hold, not only for ourselves, but for those around us who might be trapped in similar dynamics. Embodiment as the quiet rebellion. The most radical act in breaking coercive cycles is to come home to the body. Abusers thrive on keeping us disconnected, second-guessing, chasing their return. But when we learn to pause, breathe, and trust our own sensations, we reclaim the very system they tried to control. For me, this meant listening to the quiet cues. The sinking in my stomach when someone lied, the constriction in my chest when they withdrew, the warmth in my body when I was in genuine connection. These signals became my compass, and slowly the cycle lost its grip. Breaking trauma bonds isn't about dramatic exits or perfect strategies. It's about listening again, about trusting the body when it whispers, "This isn't safe," and honoring it when it finally finds calm. The practices are simple, but they are everything. Noticing the swings, accepting the sensations, rebuilding safety elsewhere, naming coercion, and returning to embodiment. Because once we stop outsourcing safety to the abuser, the cycle collapses. The nervous system, once hijacked, becomes ours again. Integration and reflection coercion does not begin with a raised fist or a shouted demand. It begins quietly, with a glance, a silence, a withdrawal, a sudden charm returned at just the right moment. It begins in the nervous system, in the way our bodies are trained to read safety and danger, love and abandonment. What has been most painful for me to learn, and most liberating to understand, is that coercion isn't just about what someone else does to you. It's about how your body is wired to respond. For years, I thought of myself as strong, aware, and discerning. And yet I found myself caught in the cycles, love-bombed and then left cold, drawn back in just as I was finding ground, accused of things that weren't mine to carry, left doubting my own presence. What I see now is that my nervous system wasn't weak, it was intelligent. It was responding exactly as it had been conditioned to. Relief after absence feels like love when your history has taught you that connection always comes with pain. The crash after withdrawal feels like death because, once upon a time, abandonment really was a mortal threat. The challenge is that our culture does not frame coercion this way. We're told to be stronger, to walk away, to not take it so seriously. We're told it's a matter of willpower, of character, of making better choices. But in reality, willpower has very little to do with it. What we are fighting against are not just individuals, but entire systems of conditioning, family patterns, media narratives, cultural scripts, and the survival wiring of the nervous system itself. And that's why this work is not about shaming or blaming. It's not about pointing fingers and saying they are evil and we are good. It's about becoming conscious. Conscious of the cycles within ourselves, within our circles, and within the collective. Conscious of how charm and withdrawal manipulate our deepest survival instincts. Conscious of how power is maintained not only through violence, but through silence, confusion, and intermittent relief. 3 initiates of healing: self, circle, and collective. As I've walked this path, I've come to see healing as an initiation in 3 layers. The first is self. This is the raw, vulnerable place where we notice our own patterns. We begin to see the highs and lows of charm and withdrawal not as love or fate, but as nervous system states. We recognize when our bodies contract, when our breath shortens, when our stomach churns, and instead of overriding these signals, we honor them. This stage is about reclaiming presence in real time. It is not easy because it often means breaking our own habits of denial and fawning, but it is the foundation. The second is the circle. These are the people closest to us, our partners, friends, and families. Here we begin to test boundaries, to experiment with saying no, to see how others respond when we step out of the old roles. Some circles expand with us, learning to relate in healthier ways. Others fall away. And as painful as that can be, I've learned that letting go of unsafe circles is sometimes the greatest act of love, or for ourselves, for those individuals, and for the space it creates for healthier connections to grow. The third is collective. This is where the personal meets the systemic. Once we've tasted the patterns in our own lives, we begin to see them everywhere, in politics, media, institutions, and religions. We notice how entire societies are kept in cycles of charm and withdrawal, of promises and betrayals, of fear and relief. We notice how governments gaslight, how the media spins, how cultural narratives normalize coercion as loyalty or love, and once seen it cannot be unseen. Healing at this level is not just about personal freedom, but about cultural transformation. When enough of us reclaim trust in our signals, the balance of power shifts. The nervous system as teacher. The nervous system is not the enemy. It is the teacher. For years I fought against it, blaming myself for the contractions, the anxieties, the doubts. But now I see these signals differently. They are messages, they are guides. They are not always comfortable, but they are always true. Charm feels like expansion, but if it is laced with manipulation, the expansion is shallow, unsustainable. Withdrawal feels like collapse, but collapse is the body's way of saying, this is not safe. Re-engagement feels like relief, but relief after terror is not love, it's addiction. When we learn to read these signals without judgment, we take back our power. We stop outsourcing safety to those who exploit it. We begin to build a baseline of calm and presence that no one else can dictate. And from that place, we can engage in relationships that are truly mutual, relationships where love is not about control, but about co-regulation, not about cycles of pain and relief, but about the steady presence of trust. Personal reflections, learning to see for me. The hardest part of this journey was recognizing how much I had overlooked. There were times I saw the red flags but ignored them because I didn't want to lose someone. There were times I stayed far longer than I should have because I confused persistence with love. There were times I tolerated cycles of charm and withdrawal because I thought the good moments proved the bad ones weren't real. I used to take mental notes rather than journaling, replaying moments in my head, trying to piece together why my nervous system reacted the way it did. It wasn't about logic, it was about sensation. And eventually, the acceptance came. I began to trust that my body knew what my mind tried to explain away. I learned to listen. This shift has changed everything. I no longer feel guilty for stepping away when someone cannot meet me with respect. I no longer internalize accusations that I'm fickle or cold when I refuse to keep cycling through harm. I no longer collapse when charm turns to silence. Because I see it now, I feel it, and feeling is enough. Integration beyond the personal. But I want to stress again, this is not just about me or you or any one person. Coercion is a collective pattern. It thrives in silence, in the unspoken agreements that this is just how love works, how politics works, how families work. Integration means breaking that silence. It means naming coercion for what it is, whether in the intimacy of a bedroom or the halls of government. This series has always been about more than individual healing. It's about creating a language for the collective. Because when we can name the nervous system states being manipulated, the spell begins to break. When we can say, this isn't love, this is coercion, or this isn't loyalty, this is manipulation, we loosen the grip of those who profit from our confusion. Awareness spreads, silence cracks, and healing ripples outward, from outsourced safety to inner sovereignty. If there is one lesson I carry from this episode, it is this: safety cannot be outsourced. Not to a partner, not to a leader, not to a system. Safety begins within, in the breath, in the body, in the signals we've learned to trust again. When we reclaim our nervous systems, we reclaim our lives. We stop living at the mercy of charm and withdrawal. We stop mistaking relief for love. We stop carrying shame for cycles that were never ours to own. And from that place, we can love more freely, not because we ignore danger, but because we honor safety. We're now at the conclusion. In this episode, let's recap what has been discussed. We explored the hidden mechanics of power, control, and coercion, how abusers and systems alike manipulate the very wiring of safety and danger inside us. We've seen how charm disarms, how withdrawal destabilizes, how re-engagement hooks us deeper into the cycle, and how healing requires breaking not just contact, but the spell of silence that surrounds it. Remember, these reflections are not about demonizing others or shaming ourselves. They are about consciousness, about naming what has been hidden so that healing can begin, about reclaiming our nervous systems so that no one else dictates our state. Because coercion thrives in silence, but awareness breaks the spell. In the next episode, we'll move into episode 26, Mirror Neurons in Relationship, where we'll explore how couples, families, and communities sync through nervous system resonance. We'll look at why moods are contagious, how laughter or anger ripple through groups, and how connection itself can heal or harm. Until then, thank you for listening. May you carry forward the strength of your own body's wisdom, the compassion of knowing we are all shaped by these patterns, and the courage to trust your signals again. You've been listening to The Body Knows, James Miller.